When Christ freed us, he meant us to remain free. There are many, if one looks across the globe, who manage to make of their faith not so much a relationship as a religion, and find themselves creating shackles of their own. It can happen that they're no longer free to love and to rest. The classic example would be the soul who has created such an armory of self-defense that all these prayers must at all costs be said before midnight. Hence it is that any possible moment of rest on the breast of the Lord is sacrificed so that the prayers may be said at all costs, missing completely the point of relationship and creating a religion on top of what we have already. It's perhaps an occasion to reflect next time we're before the Blessed Sacrament in an hour of just emptiness, how we are going to fill it, and whether in fact the Lord will fill it at all, or will we actually manage to push him out, and of course remain faithful to our comfort zone. Now that happened to a whole school of which the Gospel is speaking today. The whole realm of faithfulness to the Torah, the law of the Pentateuch, the law of Moses, which was not enough for them. They had also a plethora of obligatory interpretations, and they too had created not so much a relationship with the Lord of hosts, whom they had, it was the true revelation up to that point, but a religion which managed actually to become almost nonsensical, as the Lord points out. Remember now, he's the guest here, and yet he uses strong expressions, fools, and goes on to point where they're at. He didn't actually get involved with a word because he heard it. This Pharisee who had invited him was thinking only, oh, he didn't wash his hands, he didn't therefore observe the rubrics. There was no word said, but the Lord heard and responded to the word in his heart, already a message, disarming him completely. And what would be our sacred thoughts? This, in our etiquette, would be utmost discourtesy. But the Lord was courtesy incarnate. I'd like for a second to look at this question of social etiquette, because it is part of life, every moment of interaction in everyday life. We're always passing people. Each culture has its etiquette. We who come from another culture are pleased to find that the Irish culture has not lost certain quaint elements of its own. At least where I live, one greets in some way, with some acknowledgement of the eye at least, every passerby. One doesn't pass by a human being without acknowledging his existence, even the children. In Italy it's different again, because in the country where we were, one is far more exposed to the people because one is always outside, and one has a lot to do with them on that level. Going into the houses a lot to bless things and so on. The church is a part of the fabric of life, big time there. They didn't have Protestantism, so things have gone on. Processions, ceremonies, outside, and so on. It's all life. And every time one meets a person, one has to know how to interact within that life that we share in common. In Italy, it's knowing what word to use with what person. There's a difference between salve, a noble greeting to a priest, and ciao, not quite so noble, just etiquette which one needs to know. In Ireland, one has to know how and what to say to open the door already of humanity. If one is dysfunctional in one's humanity, one is a nuisance for the Lord. And all through life, one can't bypass the fundamental law of courtesy. It's only the idiot who does and gets away with it. He thinks he can, but he won't. For instance, how many holy people do not know the first thing about conversation, conversari? They have to have a monologue every time they talk. They are heavy. They think they're interesting. They're actually terribly boring. They are discourteous without knowing it. Also, the words that we select, it shows whether we are of a certain type. A vulgar person will use vulgar language and not know the difference and expose himself to being precisely unacceptable. If that comes into the clergy, it's painful. There are some seminaries, I don't know if it still happens, but they used to have lessons of etiquette, how to behave in society. It was so necessary that they couldn't bypass it. There are ways also of knowing certain things to do and not to do with regard to taking people for granted. The rule of thumb is one answers a letter in the same way that it was written. Just remember that, it can be useful for you. And there are whole rules in different cultures about how to greet, to start and stop a letter, according to what one is addressing. The very fact of acknowledging a letter is important. Not to do so is discourteous. And I remember hearing this years ago in France. A priest should always acknowledge a Mass stipend. It's very, very important. And in general, one should always acknowledge a gift. One should not presume anything. It doesn't have to be very long, but there are ways and means of getting it across that one is grateful and not presuming. There are also rules that apply to all ages, even from the child upwards. To apologize is a part of courtesy. The person who goes through life never making a mistake will never apologize. And he's the greatest producer ever of mistakes. There are also rules about how to engage with a person that one doesn't know. The first rule of courtesy is to show that that person exists and to give him the honour of a space, of a stage, that he may say who he is, what he does, and to indicate by that he matters on earth. It's already an open heart, and from there can come sharing of a heart. And on will the courtesy go by not then in any way contradicting or attacking. One takes a person where the person is. And should there be desire for more, then one freely gives. One does not come at a person or invade that person. That person is a universe of his own. And a priest or any person in a profession of that nature, a doctor, a psychologist, must give the person the courtesy of having the impression that that person is the only person on earth at that point of contact. And therefore a new discourtesy is to allow another person to come into the conversation by answering a phone. I remember hearing that years ago in France, before mobile phones came in, that in a conversation of a certain kind, one should not be accessible. The phone simply lifted the phone off the receiver if one was next to a phone. It's already a courtesy that gives that person the stage. Because a person who starts to talk seriously and finds that his important point is just coming up and someone else comes from the moon and has the throne, is very much thrown back. Oh, that's all I matter. And by the way, this goes to every level. A priest or a bishop who is very difficult to get hold of is actually not what he should be. What has to be, in the first instance, as available as one state suggests. A priest is a man for others, and if he's not there for them, he's not performing. I want to go into heavenly courtesy because on this 13th of October it concerns us and the whole planet. It has been asked why Our Lady in this last century has been so active on earth. And the question probably is deducible from present events. We need it. It's only a century on since this maximum of intervention at Fatima, which, by the way, would have been more powerful had there not been the kidnapping. We know that from testimony of the time, that it was going to be even more impressive, this miracle of the 13th of October. But Our Lady did have to explain to them that the way that she herself had been treated, in fact, meant that it had to be somewhat less spectacular. But nevertheless, spectacular it was. What happened? It has been perceived by experts that the way that the sun came down to earth and gave the people the impression that it was the end of the world was not indifferent. It has been speculated that it could be a hint that because of the very nature of the sun, which is a nuclear ongoing reaction, some kind of fission which gives huge energy, heat and light, that there could be something which perhaps would be linked with a future event from that time regarding that energy, atomic energy. With regard to that, we can see how it could easily happen. Right now, there is, as you know, a considerable amount of tension building up between China and the United States over Taiwan. They've got as far as Hong Kong. Now they're talking about doing something similar in Taiwan. And it would seem that President Trump is pulling back his troops into the States to be available should there be some push. And if that should happen, two major world powers with atomic energy, it could be devastating. So, watch this space. Whatever that may or not be, we need to be aware that we're not here forever, and heaven knows. And that same Blessed Virgin did warn that souls were going into hell as snowflakes fall to the ground. And she showed, yes, the little children who were only tiny, what hell was, so that we adults might sit up and listen. And she also asked us to include at every decade, O my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. All over the world, all day, that prayer has been said. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy. And Lucia was asked what that meant. Does it mean the souls in purgatory? No, it means the souls in grave sin. This is to be borne in mind because she gave us the remedy. She wanted the rosary said every day, and she asked for it 6 times. Each day she came, she asked for it. And also devotion to her Immaculate Heart. She did mention specifically the question of Russia, which is interesting. I won't go into that now, but it does matter, because Russia was one of the most mystic countries on earth until the revolution, La Sainte Russe. Potentially it could get back there. If Russia were to be converted, and the experts believe that that means actually also recognizing the Pope, then there would be again reconciliation, and the Church would breathe with its 2 lungs. And we need them. We need their mysticism and calm. We are too much in a hurry. And maybe we could acquire depth of life, quality of life, if we took this grace for what it is, a pause in the system, an invitation not to be spending our time chasing our tail, but to get back to that relationship where we just rest on the breast and hear him beat.